Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to my YouTube channel, The History Squad. Now today we're on location at the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument in Montana. We're going to explore what happened here on the 25th of June 1876. What some of you may recognize as the battlefield of the Little Bighorn, or what the local Sioux called the Battle of the Greasy Grass, or Custer's Hill, Custer's Last Stand. So we're leaving Last Stand Hill, the site where Colonel Custer literally made his last stand, and we're moving towards where the battle kind of started, where the US troops first entered the battlefield area. We're actually leaving the national park now and travelling along private roads or private land, but we're allowed to be here. But this gives you an idea of just how big this battlefield area was. I understand it's almost 5 miles from one end to the other. Now either side of the road there are deep ravines you can see here. They're called coulees. Now I'll tell you, if you're caught at the bottom of a coulee with the braves and the warriors on the top, you'd be finished for sure. And just off to the right is the river, the Little Bighorn itself. It extends the full length of the battlefield and winds and turns back on itself. It makes lots of loops, but this is where the battlefield gets its name from, the Little Bighorn. So what was it all about then, this Battle of the Little Bighorn, or the Battle of Greasy Grass? And you have to go back into the Black Hills where we've recently been, in Deadwood, in that area. Gold. So the Black Hills are sacred to the Sioux. In the Treaty of Laramie, the Black Hills, the sacred Black Hills, belong to the Sioux in perpetuity. They're there forever. Now, in 1874, the government sent an expedition into the Black Hills. It was called the Black Hills Expedition, led by one Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The purpose of the expedition was to find a suitable location for a fort, and also to explore the possibility of gold being present in them there hills. And indeed, gold was found, and unfortunately the news of the find made the front pages of the newspapers. It was major headlines, and of course miners, prospectors and all those associated with the gold rush flooded into the Black Hills. Now the government was duty bound to stop them, because the Black Hills, sacred to the Sioux. But it was a half-hearted attempt. So the Sioux now are on the warpath. Their sacred hills have been taken over. And what will happen is there will be attempts to purchase the Black Hills, but in the end they'll just be pushed off and pushed back into their reservations. And I'm an outsider. I'm not a citizen of the United States of America. I'm completely outside. And I've always admired the natives because of their archery and that kind of thing. Let me just show you this wonderful little thing. Now this is a replica, and it's an arrowhead that's been made out of a spoon. There's the neck of the spoon. The spoon's been flattened out, sharpened, and this can be shoved into an arrow. So your natives there, your Sioux on the reservations, were given spoons, knives, forks, and they made things out of them. But there was lots of the Sioux particularly, and some of the Cheyenne, who didn't like being confined to the res. They wanted to move out into the hunting areas. Now Sitting Bull, one of my childhood heroes, if I remember, his name was Buffalo Sitting Down, and it became known as Sitting Bull. He said, keep away from the white man. Have nothing to do with him. Let's go to the hunting areas. They won't be able to touch us. And sure enough, he had success. He was there, but gold in them there hills. The US government are against what they called hostiles who were off the reservations. They're going to send an expedition to actually push the hostiles back onto the reservation. Now these reservations, they were run by government agents, Indian agents, and some of them were crooked. And ironically, these Indian agents often traded with hostiles. That's Sioux warriors who lived off the reservation, but they would come back onto the reservation to trade. They traded furs, skins, for coffee, for sugar, but most importantly, for firearms and ammunition. They also traded with enterprising white traders. This is where they get their repeating rifles and their 6 guns. Now, the Indian agents were responsible for issuing rations, food, coffee, tea, that kind of thing, to the Indians who lived on the reservation. But these rations were often late, substandard, underweight, and it was this that caused a famine on the reservations. So now you have Indians starving to death on the reservations. But off the reservations, you have Sioux, Cheyenne, who are actually thriving in the hunting grounds. There's plenty of buffalo, there's plenty of antelope. So people are going to move off the reservations and they're going to go to Sitting Bull. They're going to go to these great medicine men and these great chiefs. The reservation system is failing. So the US government are going to send the military in to force the natives, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, back onto the reservation. Now, just to let you know, the amount of bands of natives that went towards Sitting Bull, to Crazy Horse, all of these great chiefs. You've got the Hunkpapa Sioux, then small bands of the Yankatoni, the Santee, the Gull, but then great massive bands of the Oglala Sioux, Crazy Horse, Red Clouds people, the Brule, the Blackfoot, Two Kettles, Miniconjou. Then you've got the Sanzark, the Arapaho, and the Northern Cheyenne. These people are flocking together. So in the end, you had 5,000 people all together, and they can pack up their camp overnight and move. They were organized and they were determined. They're not going to go back onto the res to starve. Can you blame them? And they've bought rifles, they've bought repeating pistols. Some of them even had muzzle-loading rifles, bows and arrows, clubs, coop sticks, and lances. And they had a massive pony herd, which, as they moved it, could eat plenty of grass. They were doing all right. And along comes the US Cavalry. So you look at it from the US side, they send a bit of an army. There's General Crook, Colonel Gibbon, and General Terry. They're actually going to advance down here. The plan is to intercept this massive Indian camp. What they're going to do is drive off the ponies, attack the camp. If they can, capture the camp with all of the civilians, you know, and not the women and the children, the old people. That way it'll force the warriors to surrender. They won't be mobile. That's their plan. Now, unfortunately for them, General Crook on June the 17th is intercepted at the Rosebud. It's a river further down, and he is defeated, and he has to retire from the field with his troops. So that leaves Colonel Gibbon and Terry. They're going to come round to the north of Little Bighorn, where it is believed this massive camp will be. Now, General Terry releases Colonel Custer with his 7th Cavalry to go on and scout ahead. Now, I've had a look at his orders, and it basically says, scout and report back. But what Custer does is he splits his own command, the 7th Cavalry, into 3. You have Major Reno with 148 men, Captain Benteen with 138, and you have Custer himself with 255. But you also have your Indian scouts, which consisted of 2 officers, 2 interpreters, 5 guides, and 35 enlisted scouts. But then you have the mule train, the baggage train, which is enormous and slow. And it's this area now, where we're in, where the mule train actually stands. So we're at the beginning, and yet we're at the end of the battle. But if you look into the distance there, in those hills, right in the distance, it was on top of those hills, from the Crow's Nest, which is one of the hills in the distance there, where Custer's scouts first sighted that there was a native camp here. The Sioux and the Cheyenne are here. What they're not expecting is there are 5,000 of them, and anything up to 2,000 of them are warriors. Now understand these warriors, their code of ethics, they are brave, fearless, but they don't have tactics the way the military will. The US Cavalry, they'll have horses, 4 men, 3 will fight, 1 will hold the horses. This is the problem. The way they skirmish forward, you're losing men because they're holding the horses. Now, their Springfield carbines, they were good, their ammunition was good, but the natives, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, they bought repeating rifles. They like the 6 guns as well, so they can shoot fast. Also, you've got bows and arrows, and the arrows, of course, have got spoon arrowheads, razor sharp, right? So the cavalry don't know what they're blundering into. They're going to go and they're going to search. We're going to move around the battlefield now and show you the path of Reno and of Custer and of what actually happened. Now, if you want to visit this battlefield monument, it's all mapped out for you. The story is here. I've been here before, and I'll tell you, this place is brilliant. The Americans, you really know what to do with your national parks. Well done. So the 7th Cavalry here under Custer got 600 men. He divides them into 3, and there's an extra division for those guarding the mule train. Now Custer's going to come across behind us, north of the Bighorn. Reno goes down the hills, and he crosses the Bighorn just down below there, because out on the plain is the 5,000 encamped Sioux and Cheyenne. But Reno only sees the tip of the camp. He doesn't realize it's so large. As soon as he crosses the river, he sees teepees and he engages. Don't forget the plan. Separate the ponies, get the ponies away, take on the camp, capture the civilians, then the warriors would be forced to surrender. That's their plan. But as Reno goes down into action, people panic in the camp. Yes, they move, but the warriors don't panic. They get their ponies, their weapons, and they attack Reno. In no time at all, he has to form dismounted skirmish lines. But there are more and more natives there, and they're trying to outflank. You see, their tactics were quite simple. They will either surround you and try and get through your lines to then overrun you. It's quite straightforward. But they followed their chiefs, Crazy Horse, those kind of people. They followed them. So those people had great bands. And here, nearly lost my new hat then, Reno has to fall back, and he goes through the trees. Otherwise he was going to be completely run. Then his scout is shot straight through the head, and Reno is covered in brains and bone and blood. They reckon he was in shock because now he panics. Run for your life, basically. And those cavalrymen have to retreat across the river and up this coulee, running for their lives. You can actually see where they ran because there are markers for where the dead were actually found. They eventually make their way back and meet Benteen, where the mule train was just arriving on the battlefield, and there they join forces. Meanwhile, Custer is further on. Right, we're on what's called Sharpshooter's Ridge. It earned that name because when it was almost all over, this is where the Sioux actually held positions and poured fire down on Reno and Benteen. But this is also the position where Custer is coming up north of the river, and he can see the camp, but he also sees Reno's charge going in. So he sends messages back to Benteen to support Reno, bring up the mule train, bring up supplies. This is what took place here. But Custer now moves on because he can only see the tail end of the camp. His idea is if he moves north, he can come round and cut off the path of the fleeing Sioux and Cheyenne. He still has no idea there are anything up to 2,000 hardened warriors waiting for him. This is Weir Point. And this is where Captain Weir with D Company advances without orders to try and locate where Colonel Custer actually is. There's gunfire ahead. He doesn't go any further than this. He's joined by Captain Benteen and his troops, but they eventually are forced back because the Sioux and the Cheyenne are coming for them. It was on this spot actually that the 7th Cavalry troops that were left realised that Custer and all of his men are no more. There are over 200 men out there. They're all going to be dead. Can you imagine how dismayed they must have been and how scared when they saw the Sioux and the Cheyenne coming for them? This is Medicine Tail Coulee down here. We don't know for certain what happened, but it is understood that Custer divided his troops to get them to go up onto the high ground. He stays, we see, I and L Company and moves north along the high ridge, and he sends E and F Company to scout what's now called Medicine Tail Ford. Now a lot of this is conjecture because remember, there were no survivors amongst the troops that advanced with Custer. Much of the information that we get comes from the native warriors. But at the same point, we do know that Custer sent a message back for Captain Benteen to join him and be quick. Now, as E and F Company approach the river, when they get to this point, there's a ford across the river. You can just see on the little tree line there. And beyond now, Custer's troops can see the extent of the native camp. As they go across the ford, they actually fire on the natives. But native warriors now start to build in their numbers and defend the ford. And they now cross and now pursue Custer's troops back across here, back towards what they call Battle Ridge. This is a crucial part of the battle now because Benteen and all of those troops and Reno are way back there. Now the natives can turn their attention completely on Custer and his troops. Let's go and take a look. Let's move further on. So we're in Deep Coulee now. What happens here is Custer's troops, they've had their first real engagement with the enemy. They're moving here trying to get together with the rest of Custer's troops. But now Sioux Cheyenne warriors are pouring across the river, which is just over yonder, and they're coming round. The warriors are going for the high ground and they're trying to surround Custer's retreating troops. Now you imagine you're on your horse. These horses have been on the march for a very, very long time. They're tired, you're scared, you're turning around trying to fire at the warriors who will dart in, dart out once they've shot. They like to get really close to you and fire their pistols into it. It must have been absolutely terrifying. So now, right over yonder, 7th Cavalry's literally galloping for their lives. It's incredible. When I was a kid, it was Custer's last stand. Famous shot of him and all of that kind of stuff. There's more to this than meets the eye. So many books written about it. One of my favourite is Wooden Leg. He was one of the chiefs who actually dictated his story, and what a wonderful read it is. Let's move on down the line. We've just come up Greasy Grass Ridge. Top of Greasy Grass Ridge, warriors were putting fire down onto the cavalry. At this point, the US Cavalry C Company make a charge into a large group of the warriors. They come under heavy fire and have to retreat onto the ridge. Lame White Man, one of the warriors, leads an attack against them and wipes them all out. Lame White Man fell not far from here. You can see the markers all around here. There was a fierce fight for sure. It was here in this coulee that Crazy Horse and White Bull actually took on the 7th Cavalry, and you can see groups of men try to make a stand, but they were literally wiped out. What they were trying to do was unite with Custer's command. Last Stand Hill, about half a mile distance, but just across the road there is a marker, a different marker. I'd like to show you this. So these are the markers for fallen native warriors. Here we have Matoheton, Bear with Horns, a Miniconjou Lakota warrior. Fell here June 25th, 1876, while defending the Lakota way of life. Wow. If you look back now, see the extent of this battlefield. You see white markers all the way along into the distance. So this is it, Last Stand Hill, Custer's last stand. You know, he was surrounded, he got nowhere to run. So what they did, 41 men I think were there, was they shot their horses, made a breastworks, got down behind them. But it was too late. They were overrun. They didn't stand a chance. This is where Custer fell. You can see it's been marked out specially. His brother was killed here, and he has a headstone marked further down. The civilians and some of the officers' bodies were, when they were identified, removed from the battle site. What happens long after the battle? Bodies that have been buried where they fell, their places marked, their bodies recovered, and are buried on the top of Custer's Hill. There is the war memorial there with their names. And just behind it is another kind of a sad thing. It's the horse grave. They buried all the horses together too. But I want to take you to just the last little bit of the battlefield. I want to show you something. Behind me is Last Stand Hill. Custer's dead. E Company tried to make a break for it. And you can actually see we got two markers here, but if you follow the path all the way down, you can see how these men were pursued and cut to pieces. You know, they're literally everywhere. Can you see the guy over in that little dip, that little coulee over there? Guys running for their lives. You know, you look at these markers here. This US soldier who fell here could come from Birmingham, my hometown, from London, from Glasgow, from Dublin, Stockholm, any of these places. They've come for a new life, and look where they ended up. You see the path that some of them took. They've gone down in the coulee and up the other side. But coming the other side are warriors, Sioux, Cheyenne, coming over the tops of these hills, pursuing their friends all the way down. By now these men are on foot and absolutely terrified, running for their lives. This is Deep Ravine. This is where Custer's men finally meet their end. Custer's last stand is up on the hill. His men from E Company, I understand, all the way down, and down in the bottom there. Warriors on both sides shooting down at them. It must have been a massacre. If I remember correctly, there are over 20 men unaccounted for, and they reckon that their bodies are buried down there in that ravine. Maybe one day archaeologists will go down and their bodies will be found. There are lots of twists and turns to this battle, to this story. But for the Sioux and the Cheyenne, it was a high point, because what will happen after this is they will be pursued, buffalo numbers will decrease, starvation, many will return to those reservations, hopefully the law's changed. Sitting Bull will make his way to Canada, he will eventually return. Crazy Horse, he will surrender, but he was a hard prisoner and he was stabbed in the back with a bayonet. But here at Little Bighorn, what a monument to all of those who fought here, on both sides for sure. As you've seen, the whole battlefield is littered with these markers of where men fell on both sides, but it's rare to find a US cavalry one with a name. This is Lieutenant Sturgis. Now there's a reason behind this. As the warriors passed over these cavalrymen, the dead and the wounded were then seen to by the women and the old folks who were following the warriors. They were armed with clubs and sharp knives. They would club the wounded to death, and then the bodies will be torn open, decapitated, disfigured. Now this was part of their belief that if they did this to the body, it wouldn't recognize them and follow them in the afterlife. It was a spiritual kind of thing. People think it was just for being mean. It was actually part of their culture, part of their beliefs. So many of the cavalrymen here, when they were placed shortly after the battle into their shallow graves, they were all buried where they fell, they would then begin to decompose. So it was rare to find any of them that were identifiable. Many of the warriors who were killed in this battle, I think there was about 160 to 100 who were killed, they were actually removed by their families. So there is only a few markers there where we know where the warriors fell. But there's over 200 US cavalry markers here. And it's testament to how things could go wrong. Should Custer have split his force? Should he have slowed down? Should the other officers have come to his support? Should the generals never have split their forces? Well, that's for you to decide. This battlefield is vast and it is mind-blowing, but I think it's wonderful the way that the whole area has been preserved, looked after for future generations to come and visit and find out really what happened to Custer on his hill. Finally, before I finish the tour, I must show you the Indian Memorial. It's to the brave warriors who fought and of course those who died here. It's a symbol of remembrance for them. It honours those Lakota, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho warriors who defended their beliefs, their values and their way of life. As you read the polished granite walls, it's quite moving. They're inscribed with quotes from chiefs and warriors from the different bands, and they tell stories of bravery, sacrifice and resilience. And I just love the bronze sculpture here. There are 3 warriors riding into battle and a woman running alongside and handing one of the warriors a shield. It's quite lovely, really is. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tour. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can have a look at joining our Patreon community. The link is in the description. Now, before I go, quick shout out to some of our Patreon members. I've written it down so I don't get the names wrong. Declan Barney, Liam Lilly, Lord Dan DeLench. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.